Okay, so yeah, I'm Marcus Fairs, and 13 years ago, I started a website called Dezeen. The topic of my talk today is good design for a bad world. In the panel discussion we were just listening to, I think it's clear that all of us in the design community realize that what we're doing in the space of architecture and design is tiny compared to the issues that the world is facing. And I think architects and designers everywhere are starting to wonder what can they do about it. Can they actually start to make a difference in the huge issues our planet faces? But I'm not a designer, I'm a journalist, so really the topic of my talk should be good journalism for a bad world, because my job is to take what you guys do, put it on our platform, separate the good from the bad, provide a platform for discussion, and figure out whether collectively we can make a difference, especially at a time when fake news is everywhere, where social media platforms are helping to pollute the truth, and where all of us struggle to get good information, and when journalism itself is under attack. So Dezeen means design magazine. When I started Dezeen, I thought everyone would understand that Dezeen means design magazine, but it confuses everyone. We still get people calling the office saying, "Can I speak to Mr. Dezeen?" They think maybe the brand is named after somebody from the Netherlands called Peter Dezeen or something like that. And this is the website. Hopefully you've seen it once or twice in your lives. Our mobile site there. So yeah, we write primarily about architecture, interior design, and then also technology as well, and art and things like that when it's relevant. Dezeen is, I'm proud to say, the world's most popular and influential architecture and design magazine. It's one of the 5,000 most popular websites of all websites in the world. And also, as I'm sure you've noticed, it has a hugely engaged and often very, very antagonistic and passionate commenting community. We're one of the 1,000 most commented websites in the world. By the way, this is quite strange. Have you seen there's a slight delay on this video thing here? So I wonder if I can actually have a conversation with myself. Hello, Marcus. Did it work? Did I say that afterwards? Anyway, Dezeen gets 3 million visitors every month. Now we stream 5 million videos every month. Video is a huge tool for us. We have huge social media following, 2 million Instagram followers, 1 million on Facebook. I'm saying this as if I'm proud of our social media following, but given what Facebook and Instagram are doing now in the political sphere, they're not really our friend. They're like a frenemy, social media. Our proudest moment was when Apple featured us in 2 keynote launches a few years back. The launch of the iPhone 5 featured somebody sending an email to their friend on the iPhone 5 saying, "Check out this amazing architecture website." They clicked on their iPhone 5 and Dezeen popped up. And then the next week, we also featured in the launch of the Apple MacBook Pro. This is Phil Schiller showing the world how the new MacBook Pro Retina screen crisply renders the Dezeen logo. And everyone says, "Oh, that must have been amazing for our website traffic." Well, it was a disaster, actually, because we had so many people wanting to come and see what Dezeen was that it took us out for a few hours. We have a very, very global audience. The USA is our biggest audience. The UK is number 2. And part of the reason why I'm here is India is number 3, and it's grown astronomically in the last couple of years. 2 years ago, India wasn't even in the top 10 countries in terms of people who visit our website. Something really extraordinary is going on in India. There's so much engagement from India. There's so many people checking out our website. So we don't have enough interaction with the Indian design community, though. We don't publish enough work from India. We don't get enough comments from India. We don't do enough about you guys. I'm very, very sorry about that, but I'm here to start to put that right. Because as we can see from the previous discussion, there's loads of good stuff happening here. I have a personal connection to India as well. I'm married to a very beautiful Punjabi Sikh, a second-generation British woman. That's us getting married a few years ago. And she's also actually the co-founder of Dezeen, and I always get into a bit of trouble because I don't tell people enough about how she's helped me launch the business. She's at home right now with the kids, but she also does a lot of work for the company. So it's a family, Dezeen is a family-run Anglo-Indian company. So I was a typical school kid who didn't really know what to do with his life. I was interested in everything. I was not particularly especially good at one particular thing. But one day I went into the art library and found a magazine called Blueprint. Do any of you know Blueprint? Do any of you remember it? It was this kind of, it opened my eyes to a whole world of avant-garde and contemporary architecture and design. People like Neville Brody were just starting out then, Jasper Morrison, all these names, Tom Dixon, all these names that are sort of global stars now. This magazine helped to launch them. So then I abandoned my teacher's plans to send me to Oxford to study science or something boring like that, and I went to art school and to do design, and I discovered I was not very good at design, really, but I was good at thinking about design and writing about design, and I think my first brush with the idea that architecture and design can change people's lives came when I was studying in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, and I lived on a high-rise, Corbusian-style housing estate. And one day from the balcony of my apartment, I watched a riot. I watched the local community set fire to all the shops, smash all the windows. The police came in, riot shields, helicopters overhead, smoke everywhere. The next morning, devastation, people in tears. It was a complete breakdown of the social order. And I decided to do my dissertation on this housing estate to try and explore what had happened. And like so many places all around the world, after the Second World War, with great intentions, architects got together with city planners to improve the lives of ordinary people. People who had before lived in housing like this. This was where I lived in Wolverhampton prior to the building of the estate, with no running water, no heating, no sanitation, rats, damp, all kinds of, it was a slum, basically. They pulled this down and they built a futuristic paradise for the working class people. But for reasons which are now much better understood, they just didn't work at all. There was no distinction between public and private space. Also, the factories where all these blue-collar workers worked closed down suddenly in the Great Depression in the 70s. And so the only people they could find to put in these housing estates were students like me. It was a complete disaster, and by the time I lived there, this was the reality of this housing for the noble working class, full of graffiti, full of drugs, and just a complete mess. And what I learned from this project was that, having spoken to interviewed people who lived in the previous slums and then were given these high-rise apartments, which they loved because they were warm, they were dry, they had places to put the rubbish, but they had no community. What they'd lost from this was the sense of familiarity with their neighbors, kids playing in the streets, everyone being in it together. So the architecture had actually failed dramatically. I then did all kinds of silly jobs, not knowing what to do until I got my lucky break. I was asked to launch a magazine called Icon. This was about 15 or 16 years ago, just before the internet took off, a print magazine. And so I made Icon exactly like Blueprint magazine had been 20 years before, full of interviews with great designers like Jonathan Ive, for example. And Icon was quite a successful magazine. And then I wrote a book called 21st Century Design, which was a bit early in the 21st century to do this book, to be honest. The century was only a few years old. But this was a book which looked at what was different about 21st century design compared to the previous century. So technology was changing things, a return to ideas of ornamentation, a move away from the kind of monolithic modernist solution that was represented in the housing estate that I just showed you. The book was quite successful, but it did get me into an awful lot of trouble because my bosses at Icon magazine didn't like the fact that I'd written a book. And to cut a long story short, I got fired. I lost my job. I found myself with 2 very young children and a mortgage to pay and no job. But just before this, I discovered the power of the internet. I discovered the power of blogging. As a print journalist, as someone from the old school of journalism, the idea that you could type something into a computer, press publish, and it immediately be available to anyone in the world who wanted to read it was astonishing, because with print, it took weeks and weeks and weeks for your idea to get onto the paper, and then for the paper to be shipped to the shop, where it would sit on a shelf where maybe somebody would pick up your magazine and buy it, but probably wouldn't, because the wastage in print is terrible. Most copies would get destroyed. And also, it was extremely cheap to do this. I'd always wanted to launch my own magazine one day, but somebody had told me that I would need £500,000 to launch my own magazine. So when I got fired from Icon, I clearly didn't have £500,000. So I set up Dezeen instead. It cost me $20, $10 to buy the name, Dezeen, $10 to pay for the first month of hosting. And as you can see, this was one of the first stories I wrote. It's the worst design magazine in the history of publishing. But I thought that was quite funny that it was just me at home, like with a typewriter. The font is just the kind of classic courier font. But I was lucky because I had friends. I had friends like Thomas Heatherwick and Fabio Novembre and all these great architects and designers. I'd email them and say, oh, can I publish your new project on my website? And they'd say, what's a website? But they'd send me the pictures anyway, and I'd put the stories up. And it started to get an audience. Slowly, people discovered it by word of mouth. I didn't spend any money on marketing or advertising or anything like that. And then, very early on in the time of Dezeen, I went to Miami for a design fair, and I went to a party, and I met Kanye West. And I was like, I'm not shy about speaking to celebrities at all. So I went up to him and said, hey, Kanye, what are you doing at this design party? And he's like, oh, man, I love design. I collect the Campana brothers. I collect Martin Bass. And Claudio Silvestrian is doing my New York apartment. So I got to know his publicist, who gave me the world exclusive on Kanye West's new apartment in New York. And that was the thing that helped make Dezeen into a global phenomenon, because suddenly everyone in the world was checking out Kanye's crib on Dezeen. So I owe a debt of gratitude to Kanye. And then over the years, I had no idea about technology. I didn't set up Dezeen myself. I had to get a friend to do it. I didn't understand how it worked. But over the years, it quickly turned from this amateurish publication with just me into a more sophisticated product. We started to take on board advertising. We started to figure out ways to build a business around it. Our team grew. We moved out of our spare bedroom and got a proper office, until what it is today. And if you think back, I mean, a lot of you here are too young to remember print magazines, but in this very short period of time, 13 years, the world has transformed from receiving information in this way, in the architecture and design space, to the Dezeen way. And that has helped to create a kind of a level playing field of information. It's helped to create a kind of global community of design. And for a long time, the internet seemed to be a solution to a miraculous new world where everyone could stay in touch, ideas can be shared. But as we've been seeing lately, information can be used to bad effects as well. So we have to be very, very careful with the way that we share information online. Just a little bit about the company. So this is our office. We try to walk the walk as well as talking the talk of design. We have a beautiful office designed by a Swedish architect called Pernilla Årstedt. We have about 35 employees altogether, all very young, all very bright, most of them based in London. We have a small team in New York. We're actively looking for where our next office might be, maybe China, maybe west coast of USA, maybe India. And our brand strategy is like to take the word Dezeen and then put other words after it. So we have a Dezeen Jobs platform, which is a recruitment platform where people is the most vibrant and visited jobs board in the world. And we have our awards program that we launched last year, which Dezeen is a very democratic brand. We like to involve everyone, so we deliberately pitched it as the kind of the cheapest, most affordable awards program that you can enter. And it's been unbelievably successful. This year we had almost 5,000 people enter the awards. The jury for the awards was 75 designers, architects, journalists from around the world. And something we're super proud of is that, and we think this is the first time this ever happened in an international design awards program, half of the jury were female. Which brings me on to the point of my talk, which is what Dezeen wants to do is to set the agenda. We want to provoke people into thinking about things in new ways. We want to provoke the architecture and design community into doing new and better things and to challenge assumptions. We just launched our first conference. We're holding a conference in London on the 30th of October, and this will do the same thing. This will try to provoke discussions that will hopefully change the way that people think about architecture and design. We're going to be talking about the circular economy, new materials, the cities of the future, how we'll live in future given the pressures of climate change, political change, technological change, things like surveillance, things like facial recognition, education. The design and architecture education system in my country and many Western countries, and also I've heard in India, is in turmoil. Are we educating people to give them the skills they're going to need to solve these problems that we're struggling to comprehend? And also entrepreneurialism, because having accidentally become an entrepreneur myself, someone who never thought he'd ever be able to launch a business, I think it's really important that creative people are given the tools to be successful in themselves and not always have to rely on a client and not always having to have that kind of master and slave relationship with somebody else who has the money, who may or may not take up your idea. And some of the speakers at our conference, Paola Antonelli from the Museum of Modern Art, Benjamin Hubert, the industrial designer, Daisy Ginsberg, who's an artist who explores future-facing concepts like synthetic biology, Paul Priestman, the transportation designer, who's like reinventing the way that in designing hyperloops and thinking about human drone transportation. And then also Neil Pinder, again to be democratic. Neil Pinder is an educator who teaches in a high school in South London and who has been really instrumental in getting kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, from broken homes, interested in architecture and design. And there's actually, there's a whole now new wave of young architects and designers that have been through his classes who are actually setting up their own businesses now and helping to make the profession in my country finally a bit more diverse. So Good Design for a Bad World is the title of my talk. It's also the title of an initiative that Dezeen worked on with Dutch Design Week in the Netherlands. I was their international ambassador. The first time they'd asked someone from outside the Netherlands to be the ambassador for their design week, and they wanted me to contribute something to the program, so I came up with the idea of a series of talks about good design for a bad world. The idea being that there are lots of problems in the world, and we identified 5 of them, which were climate change, pollution, the refugee crisis, politics, and terrorism. 5 situations, 5 scenarios that the old ideas weren't working anymore. Governments weren't able to solve them. Corporations weren't able to solve them. NGOs weren't able to solve them. I mean, these people aren't able to solve those problems, and maybe actually they don't want to solve the problems. So the question was, can design solve these problems? We weren't saying that design can solve these problems, but we were asking the question, can designers scale up their ambition from designing a cup or a chair or a house and redesign political systems, or redesign the way that people want to move from one country to another due to climate change or economic opportunities or through sheer terror? So these talks were very provocative. They all exist online as movies. So with pollution, can designers help reduce the waste that comes out of the production process of materials? Can architects and designers change the dynamic of refugees and the way we think about refugees, where we think about a refugee camp such as this one, Zatiri in Jordan, as a transit place, like people who left this place, stuck here for a while they're thinking about going somewhere else? What about if you flip that narrative and think about this as a city in its own right? What about if the people here who are all highly educated, skillful, they're entrepreneurial by definition, because to leave your home and go somewhere else takes a kind of a guts. Could refugee camps start to be seen as special enterprise zones, or could people be encouraged to set up businesses? Could they be lent money? Could they start to self-organize and solve their own problems, rather than this expectation that an NGO or a government or somebody outside that system will solve the problem? I mean, climate change, obviously, how can an individual designer affect climate change? Well, can they start to redesign the systems and the power structures that lock us into this dependence on fossil fuels? Politics, can we redesign the voting system? We have this binary system where you put a tick next to the person that you most want to win the election, which has led to all kinds of problems. What about if you had a menu of options where you chose the policies instead of the personalities? And terrorism. We did these talks at a time when there'd been a spate of terror attacks in Europe with trucks and things like that. And this was a really fascinating conversation about not just how do you make it impossible for someone to drive a truck into a crowd, but also how can you use design to make people not feel that way in the first place. I mean, there was someone there who's working with crowd calming using scents and colors in the street. Can you change the mood of people to make them less aggressive? And at what point does that then start to become manipulation, social manipulation? And then we did a reprieve of this idea last year when we talked about the Anthropocene era, which, as I'm sure you all know, is we've now entering a new geological era where the activity of all of us is having a more profound effect on planet Earth than solar activity, than volcanic activity, than natural activity. So in a way, planet Earth has become the biggest design project we could ever expect to have. We are redesigning the world unintentionally. How can we make it more of an intentional process? How can we imagine a future world which is not like the world that we've come from, but is not like the world where, if we don't change anything, we'll end up with? And a few of the other things that Dezeen has tackled over the years: gender balance. Our timing with this was quite interesting, because before the whole Me Too explosion, we'd started to research into architecture firms. We noticed that if you go onto the website of a big international architecture firm and went on to they always have a page which is Meet Our Team, and the senior executive team would nearly always be all white, older men. This is Foster and Partners. Men. It's another architecture firm. Men. White men. So we looked at 100 websites. We looked at the 100 biggest architecture firms in the world, and we literally counted all the faces on all the pages about their senior management teams, and then we emailed them to check we'd got it right, and we found that only 3 of these firms were headed by women, and only 2 out of 100 have management teams that are more than 50% female. I mean, it was shocking. I mean, the thing is, it was so obvious because we'd all lived with this fact for years, but when you saw it written down in numbers, it was really shocking. Women occupy just 10% of the highest ranking jobs at the world's leading architecture firms, and 16 of them had no women at all in senior positions. So we made a lot of noise about this, and we we encouraged people to make changes, and we got a lot of reaction. Foster and Partners, they made a pledge to tackle gender diversity. We also looked at awards programs like the Sterling Prize, the RIBA Gold Medal, and the Pritzker Prize, which at that time, like 0.5% of recipients of those prestigious awards were women. We looked at juries of prizes and found that there were still conferences where there were no women speaking at all. There were still juries, prize juries, where all of the juries were men. And I think we've managed to successfully put that issue on the table, and lots of people are making a change. You may have heard of this Brexit thing that my country is engaged with at the moment. slightly crazy process. When the Brexit vote happened 3 years ago, of course, the creative community, the architects and designers were devastated. There was a survey that found that 96% of all creative people in the UK didn't want Brexit. But it happened, the vote happened, and we were traumatized. I mean, really, it was like a sense of loss we felt that we were divorcing ourselves from this wonderful continent and this peace project. So we decided to do something about it, but rather than protest and say, cancel Brexit, which we thought was impossible, we thought maybe we can use Brexit as an opportunity for creative people, because the UK is going to have to work on its image a bit after Brexit. It's going to have to find new ways of expressing its soft power. It's going to need the creative people that we have in the UK. So we wrote a manifesto for government to say, like, okay, if you're going to do Brexit, you're going to need the creative people to rebuild the reputation, to rebuild the economy, and to rebuild people's sense of self and sense of identity. So this was our slogan. Design can help the UK thrive after Brexit, but first the government must help design. And we got, everyone signed this. It was amazing. Terence Conran, Richard Rogers, Thomas Heatherwick, Ilse Crawford, Dejan Sujic, all the great figures in architecture and design in the UK signed this manifesto, and we delivered it to the government, and we got to know the culture minister, and we got the culture minister to stress the importance of architecture and design to the UK economy. Did it make any big difference in the long run? Well, of course, not really, because politicians lie and they change jobs and so on and so forth. But it felt like our community had been noticed, this community of creatives that were, demonized almost as the metropolitan elite, finally were recognized for the vital role they play in our country. And then another thing about Brexit was that all of the right-wing press got very excited because it meant that we could get rid of the burgundy European Union passport and go back to the imperial blue passport, which felt like such a backward step, like just going back to an era which we wanted to leave behind that we're not proud of at all. But of course, a passport is a really powerful and important sense of your identity. So we thought, what if we redesigned the passport? What if the passport became a symbol of a bright future rather than a nostalgic and dark past? So we hosted a competition to design a new passport. We had hundreds of entries from all around the world. We had grandmothers from Cape Town sending in designs. We had school children from Poland sending in designs. It was really amazing. And this is a short movie that explains some of the shortlisted entries. We asked people to actually make the passport and send it in. This one's really nice. This was like a scanner, an airport scanner showing what a classic British person might take on the plane with them. So there's a Paul Smith pair of socks and things like that. And this one was the one that eventually won the competition, and it has this beautiful ambiguity. If you believe in Brexit, it's the color gradient is, the re-establishment of the great blue British passport and the pushing away of the European passport. But if you love Europe like I do, it's more like the sunset of our European dream. This one is like a club lanyard that you wear around your neck, and it also riffs on the fact that British people are terrible at foreign languages. So it has phrases in it so you can re-establish your friendships around the world. And this one took the idea of identity to an extreme. So, there's a resurgence of nationalism and people wanting to not be part of a global community anymore. And that last one, the idea was that you became a country all of your own. Through technology, an algorithm would design a unique crest for you personally, and all the passport pages would be taken from imagery from your social media feed. And this one it listed all the countries in the world according to the number of people that had emigrated from that country to other countries. And of course, the UK was the #1, sort of making a point that, who are we to talk about closing our borders when we've all benefited from this more than almost any other nation? Anyway, as I said, this was our winner. This was like on TV news, in all the newspapers, and so on and so forth. Like I said, because of its ambiguity, you can read it as the triumphal return of imperial British blue or the sad sunset of our European dream. Another thing that we've been writing a lot about recently is unpaid internships. This is a fast-changing situation. In the UK, when I started Dezeen, we had unpaid internships. I'd done unpaid internships. It wasn't seen as anything problematic until we realized that we were actually breaking the law, and then quickly changed our policy. I think, like many people, we thought that if we paid our interns, our business would suffer. Actually, the opposite happened. By professionalizing the intern program, we not only helped people get a start in life, it meant that people from more diverse backgrounds could come and work with us, but it also just made the whole company feel more professional. The row exploded again this year when it turned out that the architect of the Serpentine Pavilion in London was not paying the staff that were designing the Serpentine Pavilion. This became a huge scandal. He was then forced to pay his staff. Fujimoto, another Japanese architect who'd often talked with, about his unpaid interns and saying, what a problem, it's not a problem, it's fine for them. And the thing is that in Japan, of course, there's a different culture than in Europe. There's a culture of the open desk where people go and work from a master. There's this kind of master and trainee thing. And I think there's a similar thing happening in India, where people keep sending us emails from architecture firms offering interns internships where they have to pay for them. We've got lots of examples of these. We haven't been able to get to the bottom of this. We've asked all of the people who sent these emails whether they charge interns, and they say, oh, no, this is a special training program we've set up. It's like a school. Or, no, this email has been faked. This isn't us. We're not trying to bust people. We don't take a particularly strong moral stand on this, but I definitely get the sense that in India there is concern about the way that young people are possibly being exploited in order to get their foot on the ladder in a very competitive program. Circular economy is another thing that we're actively working on. Ellen MacArthur is a former round-the-world sailor who's now dedicated her life to introducing the circular economy to the world, turning industry from being linear, where resources are exploited, turned into products, and then thrown away, into one where everything is in a constant loop. The final thing, second to last thing I want to talk about is pollution, but not pollution in terms of rubbish in the streets or whatever, but language pollution. Because if we're going to really tackle the problems of the world in terms of resources, climate change, fossil fuel consumption, and so on and so forth, and plastics, we really need to decide what we're talking about, because there's so much confusion. And this is our latest journalistic mission, is to try to nail what some of these words mean, because greenwashing is back. Companies are pretending that their product is biodegradable when it isn't. Biodegradable, for example, everything is biodegradable. If you drive your car into the sea, it will disappear. It might take 300 years, but your car is biodegradable. I'm biodegradable. This conference hall is biodegradable. So producing a biodegradable coffee cup is not a particularly big deal. The important thing is, how long will it take to biodegrade, and what damage will it cause as it does so? Compostable plastics. People are getting very excited about compostable plastics. You might think that a compostable plastic, you put it in your garden, and after a few months later, the worms have eaten it and it's gone. But compostable plastics aren't biodegradable. You have to put compostable plastics in a special composting machine. In the UK, we have 0 composting machines. So if you have a compostable cup or knife and fork in the UK, there's no actual way you can turn it into compost. If you put your compostable cup in the garden or in the ocean, it will last as long as a car. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, this has really grabbed everyone's attention, the idea that there's this massive island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, but the Great Pacific Garbage Patch looks like the rest of the ocean. Visually, it isn't there. But if you Google Great Pacific Garbage Patch, you get all these images of like lands of trash, hills of trash, almost in a hospitable place where you could go, tie up your boat and walk around on the trash. Some Dutch designers proposed naming the Great Pacific Garbage Patch as an actual nation state with its own flag, with its own passport, with its own money, as if this was a place that could seriously be habitable. But this is what the Great Pacific Garbage Patch actually looks like. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is like soup. The particles of plastic there are mostly the size of confetti. But that hasn't stopped people like the Ocean Cleanup thinking that all we have to do is send massive devices out into the Pacific to scoop up all this plastic, bring it back to land and recycle it. Of course, the problem is the Ocean Cleanup doesn't work, partly because there isn't this mountain of trash out there, and partly because if you're catching confetti-sized pieces of plastic that have been in the ocean for a long time and have absorbed all kinds of pollutants, there's not a lot you can usefully do with that plastic. Let's say, yeah, though, let's give them a chance. They've got a lot of money. They're constantly making changes to their design. Let's give the Ocean Cleanup a chance. But also, the plastic that comes out of the ocean, which is now commonly known as ocean plastic, doesn't come from the ocean. Adidas are doing products that are made out of ocean plastic. You can get trainers, you can get sportswear. You see all kinds of things now that are made from ocean plastic. But ocean plastic doesn't come from the ocean. Ocean plastic is a bit of a trick, because ocean plastic is actually plastic that might have got to the ocean if they hadn't taken it out of the river or rescued it from the beach or cleaned it up from the seaside town or whatever. So the idea that by buying some trainers made of ocean plastic are going to prevent this is actually a fallacy. This is ocean plastic. You can see it's mostly water bottles. It's mostly been collected in coastal communities from beaches and from rivers, and it hasn't been anywhere near the ocean. Also, ocean plastic is a registered trademark of Parley for the Oceans. They actually own that name. Now, Parley for the Oceans is a fantastic organization, and I don't want to denigrate them in any way, but even Parley for the Oceans don't think we're going to be able to clean up the oceans. This is Cyril Gutsch in an interview with me. He said, I don't believe we're going to clean up the oceans. The solution is to not put plastic in the oceans in the first place, which means the solution is to not have plastic. And he very firmly believes that the future is in developing new materials that are alternatives to plastic and biological systems that can grow materials. That's the challenge. Finally, last year, we got very excited about drones. We bought our own drone, and we foresaw that drones were becoming like a really powerful and exciting, but also potentially terrifying new presence in the world around us. So we started to investigate the ways that drones were impacting architecture, how they could change cities, and also the threats they proposed to society. Since we produced this movie, it's an 18-minute long documentary, there have been drone attacks at Gatwick Airport. There was the drone attack on the Saudi oil facility recently, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to show you the whole movie because it's quite long, but I'm going to show you the trailer instead. This is the optimistic part of the movie about the excitement that drones can produce. But like everything, like the internet, like information, like plastic, there's a duality, there's a flip side to everything that we talk about, right? There's good design, there's bad design. There's a future good world, and there's a future bad world. I don't have the answers. No one of you individually have the answers, but I think collectively we can do our damnedest to try to make a difference and find the good amongst the bad. I'll leave you with this little trailer, and that's it from me. Thank you. Oh, here it is. Turn the music up, please.
Drones 10, 15 years ago were immensely expensive, complex objects. Now you can just buy them at a toy shop.
Day to day we use a drone a lot. It's a really useful tool for an architect. now that drones are in the hands of every person on the street, they're potentially as disruptive as the internet.
Drones are like an expanded consciousness, an extra eye that allow us to reach places that otherwise we would never reach.
There is a lot of implications in terms of drones changing the way architecture is perceived and also in the future the way architecture is viewed.
We've probably all seen the video of the drones making a bridge using fibers. Delivery drones are here right now. You can go online and look at them delivering objects. And I think the next step is going to be humans travelling in drones.
I think you could well see the development of aerial highways.
Parking for the drones would all be on the roof. Recharging for all the drones would potentially on the roof. There's going to be probably this cloud of wasps all over the place.
That movie is online now, and you can all watch it at dezeen.com/elevation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd love to meet you all and figure out how we can help raise architecture and design in India onto our global platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcus. We'd now like to take some questions.
Yeah, okay.
Does anyone want to
Questions?
ask a question?
Oh, questions.
First of all, thank you for talking about the topic of unpaid internships. Do you plan to take this series to the next level, especially in India, where many big companies are coming, but salaries are a problem there? So do you plan to talk about designer salaries around the world?
Yeah, we're definitely planning to do a story very soon. I'd actually hoped to write the story before I got here, but it takes a lot of time to check things. The story that I'm working on is about what people perceive as a crisis in education in India. There's been a huge surge in the number of courses that are being offered. Those courses are struggling to attract the right kind of teachers. I've also, and this is what I've heard, I don't know this from first experience, that a lot of people study architecture as a way of getting a professional qualification even if they don't want to be an architect. And this is leading to a lot of concern in the profession. The thing about internships is we have not been able to prove any of these internships where people pay because the firms that we've been told are doing it are denying it, and we have no reason to disbelieve them. Also, India has a different culture from my culture, and we have to be very careful not to sort of impose our own cultural values on a different culture. That was the same with Japan. Like in Japan, there is a culture of people not getting paid when they start out in their careers. So it's a very difficult topic, but in terms of taking it to the next level, yes, we will publish this story about voicing different opinions about what's happening in education in India. And my email address is marcus@dezeen.com, so if you've got an opinion on that or some information you'd like to share, drop me a line.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have another question? We have someone here. Can we give him a mic?
Hello. It's really exciting to meet you right now because I was thinking about the kind of work that goes on Dezeen just last week because I saw a piece of work and I thought, that's what's so great about that, to put it politely. So I was thinking about journalism and how one might pick good from bad, and in terms of how journalists may refrain from going into a state of commentary. But when you have a platform like Dezeen, what you feature reflects what you support or what you identify as good or bad. So how do you decide, or how do you go about picking out the good from the bad? Because what I saw, I didn't really think was good.
Well, that's the most difficult question you could possibly ask me, because Dezeen does see itself as a neutral platform. We do see ourselves as a place where we want to publish a wide diversity of projects from all around the world. But of course, we're human beings, so there is a kind of bias and a subjectivity in what we choose. Also, like most human beings, we can only work with what we get. So most of our submissions are sent in via email, and we spend a lot of time looking through them. In fact, most of the office time is spent just going through everything. So if people don't send us their work, we don't know about it. We don't, apart from when we come to conferences like this, we don't spend too much time actively searching for stuff because so much stuff gets sent to us. And how do we choose things? I mean, we choose things that we think are, we have like 3 criteria for publishing things on Dezeen and choosing things for our awards programs. Like, is it beautiful? I think that's really important. Is it innovative? Is it doing something in a way that hasn't been done before? And is it beneficial? Is it better? Is it good for the planet? Is it good for people? Now, not everything we publish scores highly on all of those things, that's for sure. And sometimes we get it wrong. But in general, those are sort of our guiding principles. But if any of you out there think that your work is better than what we publish, then send it to us. We'll take a look at it.
We have one more person here in the front. Can we give him a mic, please?
Hey, Marcus. Thank you so much for the lovely presentation. I'm really happy that you touched upon the topic of plastics. So I do spend a little bit of time reading about plastics and what they do to the world and whether there is actually any alternatives. And being an entrepreneur myself, I'm trying to switch away from using plastics in the products that I make. Some things I really can't avoid. For example, I use shrink wrapping for my products that I make. I make notebooks, and that's the only way out. Not a lot of alternatives to talk about. One thing that I was researching while focusing on packaging was the concept of recyclable and recycled plastics. And what I read about it was most of it was a myth. And many developed countries, send out their waste to other countries to, recycle the waste. And, what I realized is even though people do send those waste, nobody actually bothers to recycle them properly. The number of facilities are far too less. They're heavily disorganized. And recently, China stopped, not recently, I believe a few years back, I think it was Operation Sword, where they actually cut down the entire acceptance of plastic waste from other countries, to process. And, now all the countries are keeping their own waste. So how do you see that as a future in the sense, countries which are, let's say, developing or, third world countries which are taking in the waste to recycle, now they're starting to reject. And, this is a heavily disorganized sector. If this is the way things are going and people are really not able to find an alternative fast, how do you foresee the situation, bloating up?
Well, I'd like to add to that, like just driving around Hyderabad, I mean, you see the plastic, not just plastic, all kinds of stuff. You see it. I mean, astonishing. Is it along the river, there's like lines of trucks, and then there's trash everywhere. And I'd like to go back there and actually figure out how they're dealing with this and what's going on. I mean, I don't know the answer. That's why I think that my personal mission is to the definitions of these words, because that's a way I can make a difference. Like, if a company is claiming that its product is biodegradable and it isn't, I want to call them out for that. I feel like that's a small area that I can make a difference. The plastics are in the news at the moment because they're finding turtles that have been strangled by plastic. They're finding plastic inside fish. We're realizing the mess that we've created. But we don't know the answers yet. The scientists haven't done enough research yet. I mean, the World Health Organization, a couple of months ago, published a report where it said it hasn't got any evidence that plastic is a health hazard. I mean, they don't know. So they have to do more research. I mean, maybe plastic isn't bad for us. Maybe we can eat plastic. I don't know. But the public and the media have, in my view, focusing on the wrong things. We're getting obsessed with plastic straws. We're getting obsessed with single-use water bottles. If you could take all the plastic straws out of the world and all of the water bottles, and there'd still be a plastic crisis. You know what the biggest cause of ocean pollution is? Which plastic it is? Does anyone know? Car tires. When you're driving around, your tires are constantly eroding. Where does all that synthetic rubber go? Eventually, it makes its ways into the rivers and into the oceans. So you'd be doing more for the planet to not drive your car and carry on using water bottles. Also, plastic is an amazing material. It's fantastic for lots of things. I was talking to the head of an Italian brand in Poland 2 weeks ago, and she was saying, look, if we make a polypropylene chair, there's no waste in the process. If that chair lasts for 50 years, then that's actually really sustainable. That's more sustainable than cutting down a forest, making a wooden chair, covering it with chemicals, using the toxic glues, shipping it halfway around the world, and then it breaking after a year. So there's a pollution in all its forms is an absolute crisis. I think, to be honest, I think there's a place for plastic in the world. It's such a good, cheap, and abundant material. And also, at the end of the day, plastic is made from fossil fuels. So if you have some plastic, that's actually embedded carbon. It's better to sit on the plastic than to burn it in your car engine.
Thank you so much, Marcus, for this wonderful presentation.